Hello gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we have a bit of a different type of video. We're going to do a Q&A video, and we're also going to talk about the stream a little bit and streaming for tomorrow. So I always read the comments for like every video. Thank you guys so much for leaving comments. I love like interacting and chatting with you guys. Sometimes I'll reply to them like, immediately if it's something that's really easy. Other times I'll kind of like wait and reply to them a little bit later. The YouTube system for how it shows me the comments, like the feed it gives me, is not necessarily like always the best. It seems like sometimes it's like I'll open it and then I can see all the comments, and then if I don't reply something right away and I want to go back later, it's like not there or something like that. It's just a little bit weird. So what I did this time was I just went through all the videos that I had posted recently, like since I came back, and I kind of, looked through all those and looked at all the comments. So that's like a much more thorough way of doing it, and like I tend to do that if I think I missed something. But if I ever do miss your comment, just put it in a more recent video, and I'll try to reply to it there. It doesn't have to be even on topic of the recent video. You can just be like, oh, I asked this in the last video. Maybe you didn't see it. So feel free to just drop them in the most recent video. Or to be honest, I guess you could ask them again in that other video, but it should show me a notification, but either one works. You can also drop by my Twitch, which I'll talk about later, and you can ask me questions there. But basically what I did, since I had a bunch of comments over the night, is I figured I'd just make a video kind of talking about all the stuff that people had requested, kind of like wrap it up into one video, and then I'll talk about the Twitch stuff. So actually, I'll mention the Twitch stuff first, and then we'll get into the comments. I'm going to be streaming tomorrow. I may be streaming tonight a little bit, just to like hang out and do some Q&A potentially. But yeah, I'm definitely going to be streaming tomorrow. So you guys will be able to see me then. I haven't linked to the Twitch yet because I have like an old Twitch that I was kind of debating. It's like, do I just make a new Twitch account for this? Like, this new Classic WoW thing, or do I use my old Twitch account? But my old Twitch account, it did like reach the minimum like follower threshold for something. So I think like it's possible. I think like you have to unlock the subscribe button, I think basically, or something like that. And I think I actually did that because I used to stream like Last Epoch and stuff. And I used to get some viewers on that. And I think that pushed me past the thing where I could actually like get the sub button. I'm not really sure how any of that works because I haven't really like streamed in depth on Twitch, but I think there was some metric that was like for having a certain amount of followers. So I figured I'd just use the old account, right? Because it has some of those metrics complete already. But the only thing is like the account name for that channel doesn't really match up with like the WoW stuff that I'm trying to do now. So I'm just going to probably like rename the Twitch account. So I just haven't really thought of like exactly what I want to name it. I'm probably going to either do just Power Word Heal, or maybe to make it the same as the YouTube because I want it to be coherent, or maybe I'll do it the character name, which is probably going to be Coraline. So yeah, I'm unsure exactly what I want to do there, but I'll have that decided by the end of the night. So I will make a video with whatever I decide there, and link that way you guys have the link for tomorrow. And yeah, I figured I'd just get into some of the questions people had. So like I said, I went through, I took all the questions, and if I missed something, just like I said, put it in a comment to this video, and we'll try and go over it again. I'm probably not going to be doing a ton of videos over the next couple days with the launch. I think what I may do is I have some stuff in backlog a little bit, like talking about dual spec and talking about buff cap and stuff like that, and I may just put some of those out, or I may do like one of those things where I do a quick recap, like for the day. So that could be interesting, how things went for that day and stuff like that. Just make a quick little video at the end of the day. And I will get back to making like the full-fledged stuff, but I just kind of want to grind hard a few days because we were doing like a dungeon group. So that's kind of going to be the plan, I think, for at least like the first 3 or 4 days. So yeah, that's all like the housekeeping stuff, and let's get right into the Q&A now. So the first question I had was, well, actually something I wanted to talk about first is a couple things you can do right when you get into the game, right? So a lot of your settings I believe are going to be saved if you played any other version of Classic WoW. So that's pretty much like keybinds and stuff like that. But things that won't be like saved is stuff like auto loot. This is always going to be off. So I just open the menu for controls, turn on auto loot right away, and then I go on to interface and I turn on the nameplates. If you are really new and you don't know what nameplates is, right? If we turn this off, okay, turn this off, right? And then we walk up to this mob. The only way we can see the HP and stuff is if we target it, and then if we go into options, interface, enemy units for nameplates, it kind of shows the HP over the top of the head. Just makes things kind of more visible in general, and you can see the HP better. Honestly, when you're playing solo, this is not necessarily the end of the world, but it's kind of nice. And if the mob does a cast, then I believe you can see it on the nameplate. You may have to have quartz for that, so I'll talk about that when I talk about add-ons. But yeah, just something really quick you should do on all your characters there. If you're new, right, and you haven't done anything before, what I would do is I would recommend making a character and maybe get to like a level 5 or 10, whatever is not really a problem for you, and just set up kind of basic keybinds how you want them, because they should transfer over to the new server, I believe. And then what you can do is you can just go to your action bar here and you can toggle these on, and you should have like all your binds basically here, right? And you can keep, just add more binds or whatever, and that way you don't have to kind of do this stuff on the fly when the game launches. So yeah, just a little quick couple things there for new players or people that are returning and forgot a couple things. So the first thing I want to talk about was somebody had a really good question about alliance racials, right? And he was like, well, you talked about dwarf a lot, you didn't really talk about human very much. And he was asking, what do I think of the human spirit racial, the one that I think it's like 5% spirit, right, for the humans? And his point was basically like, well, you don't really use Fear Ward that much, do you? And the human spirit is active all the time, so kind of like, how do you feel about that? Like, how would you compare those two things? And I think it's a good question, because I always think it's a good idea for the most part to be able to go back and talk about kind of like first principles in any given area, right? Now, obviously, if you if you only go back and talk about first principles all the time, you kind of get bogged down, right? So you can't do it all the time, but I do think that it's worth reflecting on from time to time. And with this being a fresh classic launch, this is kind of like the perfect time to kind of go in and talk about like these first principle things that people take for granted, like just dwarf priest is a god, right? And you can actually see a very interesting example of this in the comments for my priest leveling guide. Actually, there's somebody that posted a very insightful comment about trolls in PvP, and he really went into detail describing the Shadow Guard racial and stuff like that. And I just wanted to highlight that because people always say when you go Horde, undead the default for PvP, right? And for me personally, I'm still of that mentality, but that's because of it's because of specifically how I'm looking to play the class, right? There's kind of like very specific reasons why I'm choosing undead, but basically that gets extrapolated into talking about like every player, right? People will just say, oh, if you're going PvP on Horde side, you always pick undead, right? And that's not necessarily the case. So this guy did a really good job of laying out like why troll is good in certain circumstances, and how in some cases it can be better than undead priest. So yeah, definitely take a look at that comment if you're interested in Horde racials. And I think that's a great example of how you can kind of go back to first principles, and you don't just take stuff for granted, right? So really good comment by that guy. And to go back to the alliance side of things with dwarf priest, I think it's a really interesting question to be like, well, you're just getting uptime on this other passive all the time. So how does that compare to kind of like the active on, on dwarf? So we can kind of look at that, right? And how I would look at it is like this. Basically, think about your kind of like somewhat end game scenario on priest, right? I would say if you're in like full Blackwing layer gear, fully buffed, stuff like that, you probably have around like 500 and some spirit, like 500 to 600, anywhere from 4 to 600, depending on the exact gearing choices you made, the exact type of opportunities you had given to you via gear and stuff like that. And let's just assume 500 for argument's sake, right? So take 5% of 500, and that's 25, okay? So 25, remember from our other video, 10 spirit is equal to 1 MP5, right? So if you don't have 3-piece tier 2, you're basically getting like 2 MP5 out of that. And then if you have 3-piece tier 2, you're basically getting 5 MP5 out of that, okay? So you, those are kind of like that's like the maximum that you're going to be getting from like any given time from that. And he mentioned things like even taking the leveling into account, right? So let's talk about the leveling now a little bit, because the leveling you're going to have far, far less than 500 spirit, right? And you're probably going to have, I would say, I think you're going to have like, you're going to have sub 100 for the very early part of the game, then you're going to have like around 150, then you're probably going to be in the 200s. You're never really going to climb above 300. You're probably going to be 200 and something for most of the way in the latter portion of the game, right? So now you're getting, 200 and something. You figure like half of 500 at max, right? So you're basically getting like 12 and a half spirit, and you're not going to have 3-piece tier 2 at that point. Right, so you're going to have, it's basically the equivalent of like 1 MP5 in combat, but you are getting a little bit more benefit from it out of combat, so that's something that you have to remember. But basically, he's asking, if you compare the totality of the whole leveling experience, the whole raiding experience, the whole PvP experience, would that not be better than those slight couple instances where you're actually going to use Fear Ward, right? And I like the idea of this question, and I kind of like the way he's trying to approach it, but I think pragmatically it doesn't really work out, and I'll explain a little bit why. So I feel like the trouble comes in when we're trying to do we want things to be like evidence-based and math-based, right? So the natural thing that he's gone into, which is like a good intuition, is thinking about the long term, right? If we add all these little things up over time, do they actually become better than this big situational thing that you only use in certain situations? So it's a kind of a good mindset to have, but the problem is that I find that all these like little experiences, right, like the leveling and then the raiding and the PvP, they're all fragmented too much to really look at them in that total sense. And what do I mean by that, right? So it's like basically there's so many times, right, where your regen in general during the leveling process is like completely almost irrelevant, like at least in terms of changes to it, right? Because you are going to be back to full mana anyway, right? So like if I have to kill like 4 of these mobs, right, and I mana dump and I kill all 4 and I get my quest items and then I move on to the next quest, by the time I'm there, I have like so much downtime that I'm always going to be back to full mana. Right, so it doesn't matter if I have a little bit of extra spirit. It is basically completely useless in that scenario all the time, right? And I think even if you're kind of going for a grinding, right? Grinding, you're mostly in combat, and again, as we saw, you get a very, very minuscule amount of quote-unquote MP5 once you have meditation, right? From that little bit of bonus spirit from the human. And I was thinking of it in a way of doing like very simple calculation, right? So let's say you kill like 30,000 mobs, which is probably an overkill to get to 60, right? And let's say that you're gaining like 0.5 seconds on each mob that you kill, right? Like you're subtracting 0.5 seconds off the total time of those 30,000 mobs, okay? And so I think that, so at that point we have like 15,000 seconds, right? And then you convert the 15,000 seconds into how many minutes is that, right? And it's like, I think 250 minutes. Okay? So 250 minutes is 4 hours. All right? So basically, you'd have saved 4 hours throughout the entire leveling process, and that's already never going to happen because you're never saving a whole half a second on every mob that you kill having human spirit. Like that's a gross overestimation that we just made up on the fly in order to give us some idea and put this in some sort of perspective, right? So we kind of made up a number that is going to be totally inaccurate, but it's going to be in favor of the spirit argument, right? Like we're going to give a lot of charity there. And you see that even if we give it a ton of charity and we say that this is impacting our kill times per mob by like a half a second, which it won't be, when you factor in all the other things I was talking about, right? When you're considering how much little bit that extra regen is actually going to amount to in most cases. Like in most cases, you're actually getting nothing from it, right? Because you're technically getting the regen, but you're at full mana or you don't need the mana or something like that. So in any case where it's not actually needed, remember, you're essentially getting nothing. Like in any case where it's not allowing you to do more in a specific example, you have to count it as basically a net zero, right? It's essentially doing nothing. So yeah, we give the argument in favor of the racial by kind of like inflating the amount per mob, and even then, 4 hours over the course of, how many hours you're going to spend, maybe like 6-7 days getting 60 in total playtime, right? For most people, some people it's probably going to be 10, especially on a class like Priest. It's not like a super fast leveler. So it just really kind of puts into perspective how little you're gaining. And in reality, remember, you're going to be gaining much less than that. And the same thing kind of applies to like a raiding scenario, right? Because remember we were talking about MP5 the other day. We were talking about how it can be tricky to calculate outside of like an encounter by encounter basis, right? Because when you're fighting in an encounter, you're pretty much casting all the time. So you have, you always have casting regen active, right? Which is less than your normal regen. And if you're in a guild where you're not speedrunning, you can realistically plan on kind of dumping your entire mana pool into that fight because you're going to like regenerate it at the end of the fight before you move on typically, right? So in that particular situation, calculating out for MP5 is actually kind of okay, right? But then when we try and extrapolate how much mana you're going to get from MP5 and how useful it's going to be over the entire instance, it's very difficult to do if you're not speedrunning because you're constantly remaxing your mana, right? So a lot of that regen is completely wasted. And yeah, it just doesn't work very well, right? It's basically the same problem that you run into the raid. You run into that problem during the leveling experience as well, right? So I think that's a good way to kind of contextualize stuff and put it into perspective. And then you kind of go on the other side of things with Fear Ward, and you think like, yeah, you're not using Fear Ward a ton necessarily, but you basically can get like every fear or every other fear on Ani, and if you're counting the fact of having multiple dwarf priests, right, then not only is the main tank on Ani always going to essentially be fear warded, but you'll have a healer that's always fear warded, okay? So there's always somebody healing the tank, and the tank always has full control of the boss. That's huge. And you're going to be doing Ani pretty much, remember, for a long time in this game. You don't really stop doing Ani for a bit, especially in a casual guild, right? So you'll be doing Ani for quite a bit. You may even be splitting Ani. And in splitting Ani, you have to just play a little bit better, right? Like, it's not the hardest fight in the world or anything, but if Ani's running all over the place, because he's fearing the tank and auto-attacking people, it gets a little bit annoying. So just being able, I feel like just Ani alone, PvE-wise, is a very good use case for Dwarf. And then PvP-wise, it's just, the ability is really strong, right? There's nothing that the Spirit can do PvP-wise to even compare with not only the Fear Ward, but also being able to essentially trinket Rogue Blind is just insane, right? So that's really huge as well. So those two things combined are in, like, PvP, Dwarf just wins outright, right? And then for PvE, still, like, incredibly useful on a fight like Ani. And then there's a lot of other fights that the Fear is somewhat relevant on, or just, like, trash in an instance as well. I believe there's trash in Nax that fears, there's trash in AQ that fears, the bugs fear in AQ, I believe. And, like, some of these things can definitely be avoided. Like, for example, I think the bugs are a radius fear, but you may have to run into that radius for some reason to heal somebody, right? Or so there's going to be some members of your raid that are going to have to play in and around that radius. So the Fear Ward does, in my opinion, have quite a few PvE uses. I believe there's even fears on Neff, right? Or am I mistaken? Maybe not. But I think you kind of get the idea, in that the moments where there's fears in PvE, the stakes are just, like, way higher, right, than gaining a tiny, tiny bit of efficiency while leveling, or a tiny, tiny bit of efficiency across any given encounter, right? Because especially with world buffs being in this iteration of the game, if somebody dies because, like, you're in a fear, or they got feared into a bad spot or something like that, or a fear is happening in a dungeon that, like, pulls extra mobs, and maybe you did world buffs and you're going to blast out some dungeons with the world buffs, right? Now you're losing a ton of value when you could have easily prevented it by just having, like, a Fear Ward, right? So I think Fear Ward is clutch, and it's a good question in principle, but the reality is just that it doesn't. If the human spirit ratio was better, if it was like 15% spirit or something, right, or 25% spirit, that would be potentially huge, right? And then you'd have a lot more to talk about, I feel like. But because it's so minuscule, it's just not really something that I feel like even compares to the Dwarf overall. So it's a good question in principle, and it's always good to go back to first principles to answer things. But I think Dwarf is just all the way way more powerful. Now granted, obviously, if you don't want to play Dwarf for aesthetic reasons or anything, completely understandable. But Human, in my opinion, is definitely not better, for sure. I don't even think it's better against rogues with perception, because I think being able to trinket the blind is, in most cases, more effective, especially in a group PvP situation. So that's the human priest, dwarf priest thing. So spell deranking, okay? People have asked about this. I'm going to make a video about this for raid, but this question was asked specifically for leveling. So leveling, I feel like you don't tend to derank a ton. Most of the time, if you do derank, it's going to be like one rank down, essentially, of like, so if I have like 4 ranks of heal, maybe I'm using like the 3rd rank of heal. And it's really just going to depend on the situation. You're never downranking your damage spells. You're pretty much never downranking your shield. So it's basically just like, you're really never downranking when you're healing, you're casting heals on yourself. Now, it may be worth it to have a down rank heal on your bar. Like I'll have that, right, in the event that I can't cast the max rank heal on myself or something like that. But normally you always want to be using the most current rank heal on yourself when you're just leveling in the world and healing yourself to full. In dungeons, you're still most of the time wanting to use the highest rank heal, because what you want to do in dungeons is you kind of want to let your tank get a little bit low. Now, you don't want to let him get like critically low, right? Like you don't want him freaking out all the time. But you if you're really trying to make your mana go the longest possible way, then you don't want to be constantly casting in dungeons. You kind of want to be letting him take damage and then casting a heal. So when that heal comes through, you want it to pretty much top him, right? So then you can let him get low again. And the reason why you want that is because you want to have as much time between casts as possible to get as many regen ticks as possible, right? So you don't want to be like babysitting really your warrior tank or anybody in the dungeon unless it's like really required that they get babysat. Like if you think you're going to get behind because people are going to start taking a bunch of damage, then you have to heal them. But typically speaking, you want to drop heals in kind of bursts, right? And then go back to wanding and let your regen kick in. So you typically want to be using the highest, like the higher rank heals, and it you can kind of play by ear, right? If you think a heal is like too strong for a level bracket, you can just downgrade it one. You can kind of make that adjustment yourself, but for the most part, you're not really trying to use super low rank heals or anything like that early on in the game. Talking about macros, okay, so macros, I will make a video on macros, but a couple that I just wanted to kind of go over really. So the main macro that you should be worried about, there's like two, right? Target macros for NPCs, basically. So for example, like you can kind of like this target Jed macro, except a lot of times it'd be target Jed and then you'd put like start attack, and then what that would do, right, is let's say that like there's an NPC that spawns in this house called Jed, all right, and he's being camped by like everybody because he's for a bottleneck. So you would put the macro that I just made on like one of your things. You could put it on scroll wheel is the ideal thing, is what people do a lot, and they just scroll their mouse wheel, right? And the idea is it would target him and try and auto him like immediately. So you just stand like on top of his spawn, you do that. Now, if you're a class like Druid, you can do that with something like Moonfire, but Priest doesn't have like an instant. You have Shadow Word Pain, but it doesn't tick right away. So if you're ever trying to get like a named mob or something like that, that's kind of like the best way to do it, is you just stand on top and you scroll wheel with a target macro. So that's like a useful leveling macro. And then the other macros I would say is I just like to have mouse over macros, and I'll make a whole video on mouse overs. But the basic premise of a mouse over, right, is let's say that this is an actual player, right, and I'm targeting a mob, right, and I'm casting on a mob or something, and I don't want to have to target the player. Or it's not only that I don't want to have to target the player, but it also is just one less click, right? Because if I have to click if I want to heal this guy, right, I have to come over, click normally, and then start casting, right, in order for the heal to go on him. Because if I have this targeted, right, even if I have him moused over like this, if I have a normal thing, I'm healing myself because the default is to heal myself, okay? So what I did is I made a quick mouse over macro. This is one of them. This is more conditional. We'll talk about this in the actual mouse over video that I'll make, but you don't really need to do like a fancy one like this in most cases. You can just do something like this /cast, and then you do bracket at mouse over bracket, and then you can just put the name and the rank of the spell. What you can do to do this is you just like link it out of your book if you want it to be easy, right? So you just do shift left click and it puts it in here, and you save it and you drag it onto your bar. So now if I have this thing targeted over here, right, and I have this thing moused over, I can actually cast, and you'll see the heal goes on him. See? And how you use this, like, while leveling is if you're in a group or something and you have, like, raid frames, you can do that to the raid frames, essentially. You mouse over the raid frames, and it heals whoever you mouse over, and you don't have to target them individually. So, yeah, just a really useful macro to have, in my opinion. Just makes things a lot easier. And it may take a little bit getting used to if you're not used to using it, but in my opinion, it's vastly superior to not having it. So those are the main macros I would recommend kind of early on Priest. And then professions. So somebody asked about early game professions and stuff like that. I'm kind of going to go through them kind of quickly. Like right off the rip, you want, if you're going to be ahead of the pack or trying to be somewhat in the front of the pack, and you want to make your own wand, which we'll talk about in a second, you're going to want enchanting and tailoring, because that's the way to make your wand essentially. And we'll talk about that in a sec. But if you're kind of like behind the curve a little bit, you don't have to worry as much about that. You can just kind of buy the first two wands that you would make with tailoring and enchanting. So we'll kind of talk about general professions. So the one that people always recommend while leveling is skinning, and it's not really bad for a bit of extra gold. You know, a lot of people will vendor the very early mats because they're just so plentiful. And then as you kind of start to get to like the later tier mats, they'll kind of save them for when people are trying to actually level leatherworking and stuff like that. Mining is kind of fine. Mining will slow you. I mean, these all slow you down to some degree, but like mining is the one that'll probably slow you down the most. And then herbalism can also be good after that. I feel like none of these are super critical while leveling though, which is why a lot of people tend to just take leatherworking, because they take it to just get some extra materials for like vendor gold and stuff like that. And none of them are like super important while leveling. Engineering probably has the most like practical use while leveling with all the gadgets and the bombs and the grenades and everything like that. But it's obviously not necessarily super easy to keep leveled. If you're trying to keep engineering leveled, I would do engineering mining, right? If you're trying to keep it leveling, keep it like on pace with your leveling. Most of the time, I just do the what do you call it? Enchanting and tailoring to get my wands, and then I'll probably drop them for actual gathering professions, and I'll just gather what I can. It kind of depends on how you're playing, right? Sometimes, like, I'm going to be doing group leveling where there may be periods of slight downtime, so I'll kind of, like, level some of the gathering stuff in between then, and then I'll use the gathering professions to, gather in the downtime and stuff like that. If you're rushing to, like, max... I find it better, typically, to, like, you don't really want to focus on gathering when you're low level, because it's just more efficient to do it when you have a mount, right? So I don't really focus on it very much until after level 40. But to each their own there. If you want to do gathering profession, there's really nothing wrong with that, obviously, right? Alchemy can be kind of good for potions, but potions are going to be in such huge supply anyway, because there's going to be tons of people doing alchemy as well. So it's not... You don't really... The thing is, if you're playing on a server and you're not like SSF or anything like that, you don't really have to be self-sufficient, because the market is going to get... So, like, the early game market is just going to be flooded with all sorts of materials and stuff like that. So you don't really have to worry about investing in these things super early, in my opinion. So that's kind of like my little thing on early professions. I think mostly they're kind of like irrelevant. And the one that you're probably going to want to pick to make a little bit of extra gold is like skinning early. I think if you were like, let's say one more caveat on this, and then we'll move on, is I think that if you were trying to pick a profession to level while leveling that would otherwise be a little bit annoying to level, it would probably be herbalism. Now, you would think it would be mining, but the thing with mining is you can end up buying the mats like really cheap on mining to level up in the very early stages. So I would either go, I would go herbalism if you're looking to like keep something into 60, right? And you don't want to have to go back and level it later. The other thing about mining that you can do if you do want to take mining as a profession is you kind of like level it early with the actual, by smelting. And then like once you get to a point where it would be hard to, like, it'd be gold inefficient essentially to continue level it via smelting, you then, that's when you're looking for the nodes, right? So try and think of it like this, right? If you're level 0 mining, okay, I forget what level you get to mine tin, but basically, I think it's like a really low level, like 30, you can mine tin or something. So you're going to be mining early on, right? And every tin node you hit is going to be giving you levels, but it's going to be giving you levels in the lower part of mining, which is kind of unfortunate, right? Whereas if you bought copper and you smelted it to level up your mining fast, then every like tin node you come across has a better chance of like is giving you more relevant levels, because once you outpace bronze and you can no longer level from bronze from hitting bronze nodes or whatever, or copper nodes, sorry, then you're counting on the tin nodes to level you that next bit, right? And then the tin smelting to level you that next bit. So every point of tin that you either smelt at that point or acquire from a rock is like way more valuable than if you would have hit that rock at like level 30 mining, if that makes sense, right? So that's, if you are going to do mining, that's how I would play mining. I would try and level it with the mats, and then that'll help, because a lot of times it's very difficult to keep your profession in pace with the zone that you're doing, right? And mining is kind of like the exception there, because what it allows you to do is cheat a little bit in terms of the early game to kind of boost your level artificially, right? So in other words, like you can leave kind of like the starting area with like 100 and some mining, right? Which is fine, because then when you hit higher level nodes later on, you're already gonna have the mining to hit them, and you don't need to hit as many to keep pace with your actual character level as you continue to go forward. Not really sure if that made 100% sense, but I think you guys get what I mean. So mining is actually kind of a cool profession to have while leveling in that sense. So yeah, like mining's like okay if you're gonna do that. Skinning is obviously just, you know, you skin stuff for the mats, and then vendor them or keep the later stuff, and then you like herb is kind of like the same with skinning, but it's a little bit more out of the way and a little bit more inefficient. And as for in terms of like enchanting and tailoring, unless you're keeping either of those like for later, then you can just drop them after you make your wands. Then you know what I mean. Obviously, some people are gonna want to get the BOE robes, the True Faith, and if you want to do that, then you're gonna want to have tailoring. But to be honest, like, you know, even if you make your wand and drop tailoring, it doesn't really matter, because you only invested a small amount into it. It's gonna be really easy to get the linen later to level that back up. So, yeah, that's my kind of thoughts on professions there. And we'll talk about wands really quick, because people are asking about wands. So for wands, basically, I actually came over here with the intent. You want tailoring, and you want enchanting, right? And basically what you're going to be doing is you're trying to get 60 linen cloth, or like 58 technically. You might actually need more than 60, but 60 is kind of like the baseline. It's like 58 is the lowest possible amount you could get it in, but due to RNG you might need more. And basically you get tailoring, right? And you turn all these into linen bolts right here, right? And so you turn them into bolts, right? I'm not going to do the whole thing. We craft some so you can see. Then you go back to the trainer, and at level 30, you see you can get brown linen robe, right? So you basically level to 30 making bolts, and then you train brown linen robe. Now, you're going to have enough to make like 9 or 10 of these or something, or like a little bit more depending on how much cloth you get. And you basically make these and then you disenchant them, okay? And you gain disenchanting levels initially by just disenchanting stuff. And I'm going to delete this character. This was like a practice run character, but I'll kind of show you. So this is a quest reward. It's like a 1 spirit chest, but this is essentially the brown linen robe because you're making like green robe with 1 spirit on it, right? So what you do is you have 10 of these brown linen robes and you would disenchant them. And when you disenchant this, okay, you get strange dust, but you also have a chance to get lesser magic essence. So you need 1 lesser magic essence to make your ruined copper rod, which is required. It's like a mining pick, you can think of it as. It's like a material you need to do all the enchants, essentially. You can't enchant stuff without it. So you make your ruined copper rod, and then to actually make your wand, it's an enchanting, it's in the enchanting thing. I don't have it right here, but it would come up. See, this is the ruined copper rod, right? You need magic, strange dust and lesser magic essence. And a copper rod, you buy this from the vendor. You buy this actually from the enchanting person. And then the enchanting person, once I think you hit like a level 9 enchanting, which you just get from DEing stuff, you can train lesser magic wand, which is it's like a piece of wood, which you can buy from the vendor, and then 1 lesser magic essence, okay? So you need at least 2 lesser magic essence, because you need 1 to make the ruined copper rod, and then you need 1 to make the lesser magic wand, basically. So you basically just disenchant the 10 brown linen robes, and you're hoping that like you get at least 2 lesser magic essences, and if not, you have to make more of the robes and disenchant them until you get it. So that's how you make the wand from scratch. And then for the greater magic wand, it takes 3 lesser magic essences because you combine 3 lesser magics into 1 greater, okay? And it's 1 greater magic essence and a piece of wood, and the wood you just buy from the vendor again. So basically, like, after you make your first wand, you keep doing the same disenchanting strategy of the brown linen robe in order to get more lesser magic essences to combine to make the greater magic essence that you use on the greater magic wand. And the other thing about this is that the greater magic wand, I believe, is 70 enchanting that you need. So in order to get 70 enchanting, what you actually do is you use the strange dust to enchant your bracers over and over and over again, because you can just overwrite the enchant on your bracer, right? And it should give you like a level each time, basically. So you just keep using the strange dust over and over and over, and it's really easy to get 70 enchanting right off the rip. And then that allows you to get the greater magic wand. And that's pretty much the last thing you have to worry about. Like at that point, you're just going to get the BFD wand, and then the other wand at 40, like we mentioned in the other guide. So it's really easy to make the wands. To get the cloth, you want to kill humanoids. As a priest, the wand is so much of your damage that it's potentially worth like killing more humanoids than you would in other starts. So for example, like you may want to, like, you're going to get brought to areas via questing where there's humanoid mobs, but you may actually want to stay there a little bit longer and grind some extra cloth just to get your wand a little bit sooner, right? Because it's obviously really, really good for priests. So just a note about that. And the final thing I want to talk about is add-ons. So people are asking, what add-ons do I use? For me, the only 2 add-ons I really care about on launch are Rested XP, if you're going to be using that, and then Questy. I like using both. Some people are against using both, but I think that they're just really good because sometimes the arrow for like this isn't super great, and like or like the type of mob, like maybe it's telling you to kill like a dog, like a certain type of dog, but it actually needs to be a specific type of dog, right? And the Rested XP makes it sound like you can kill any of the dogs in the area. And if you mouse over something while you have Questy active, it'll tell you like if that's part of a quest or something, right? So there's lots of good features about Questy that are like supplementary to Rested XP. Like you're basically just gonna follow Rested XP, but Questy makes it so that it's impossible to misconstrue any of the Rested XP instructions, if that makes sense, right? It just helps you really dial down on like what you need to kill, and it also shows you like where they spawn exactly and stuff like that, right? So yeah, I really think Questy is a very strong add-on. I don't use like many of the add-ons I'll use during raid or anything like that at the start of the game. I'm very minimalist when I start a fresh server because I just want to minimize the amount of risk of problems. For example, I'm going to be using LVUI when I start healing raids and stuff like that, but that's absolutely not necessary right off the bat. And I don't want there to be any conflicts or anything weird to pop up on launch day. Because obviously I don't know how Blizzard is going to handle this stuff. Like what if they made a change, certain things aren't compatible, right? So I want to have the minimum amount of potential problems possible. So I go extremely minimalistic. And those are pretty much the only two add-ons, along with probably Quartz that I use at the very start of the game. And then once I cap out and stuff like that, I will make another add-on video to show you like the full suite of add-ons that I use. But at the start of the game, I'm very, very minimalistic, and I pretty much only use Questy, Quartz, and RXP. So yeah, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'm going to try and timestamp this so, you know, if you care about your specific question, you can see it. And thank you guys so much. If you have any more questions, leave them in the comments, and I will talk to you guys later. Like, comment, subscribe if you like it. See you next time.